ce que je fais dans mon salon à regarder ma télévision.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 What's up, guys? Bienvenue sur ma chaîne. Aujourd'hui, ça va être épisode 7 de Réveil, tabarnak. Compilation de vidéos très important. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous prouver à 100% le fait que ceux qui sont au pouvoir, tout ce qu'ils veulent, c'est nous tuer, nous empoisonner. Tout ce qu'ils font, c'est nous mentir. Fait que je sais que la plupart d'entre vous qui écoutez mes vidéos, vous êtes déjà allumés là-dessus. Mais envoyez ça au monde qui ne sont pas allumés. Aujourd'hui, je vous prouve ça sans doute. Il n'y a aucun doute qu'ils ne veulent pas notre bien. Fait que merci d'être là, guys. On start ça.
20 ans, on est venu me voir pour savoir si en donnant des vitamines et des compléments alimentaires aux enfants dans les écoles, on arrivait à réduire le cancer 20 ans plus tard. Parce qu'on se demandait si les vitamines permettaient d'avoir moins de cancer. Et je me rappelle être allé voir le plus grand patron du plus grand laboratoire français en lui demandant 150 000 francs à l'époque pour financer cette étude. Il m'avait reçu dans son bureau avec des chaussettes en soie rose, je m'en rappellerai toujours. Et il m'avait dit, mais pourquoi voulez-vous que j'évite le cancer des enfants, puisque mon métier c'est de vendre des médicaments une fois qu'ils l'ont. Et je m'en suis jamais vraiment remis de cette phrase, parce que j'imagine qu'il y a des tas de gamins qui finalement ont eu des cancers parce qu'on leur a pas donné de vitamines.
Ouais, on passe ça fort, guys, on passe ça fort. Je vous dis, à la fin de cette vidéo-là, ça va être prouvé hors de tout doute.
They're using ticks as bioweapons. This is Plum Island, where they are genetically modifying ticks and other animals to release them upon us as bioweapons. It's no surprise that Lyme, Connecticut is extremely close to Plum Island, okay? They're genetically modifying these diseases on this island and bringing them to the mainlands. Lyme disease and alpha-gal right now are one of the most prevalent tick-borne illnesses, and it's no surprise that Bill Gates is A, funding a lab-grown meat that does not affect alpha-gal, and B, he is funding research to create a vaccine for Lyme disease. So here he is again, creating the problem, creating the solution, and profiting on both ends.
La maladie de Lyme, ça a été inventé. C'est un bioweapon, c'est une arme biologique pour rendre le monde malade. Puis qu'est-ce que le gars il explique, là? C'est que là, ils sont en train de polluer le food chain. En ce moment, là, il y a des farmers, il y a des fermiers aux États-Unis qui trouvent des boîtes remplies de tiques dans leur ferme. Ça va être fait pour rendre le monde allergique à la viande, pour qu'on puisse acheter de la viande qui est faite en laboratoire.
You believe that children are being abused by pedophiles in Hollywood.
Absolutely.
So why are you sitting down talking to me? Why aren't you sitting down with the police right now?
I've told the police. In fact, if anybody wants to go back to 1993 when I was interviewed by the Santa Barbara Police Department, I sat there and I gave them the names. They're on record. They have all of this information, but they were scanning Michael Jackson. All they cared about was trying to find something on Michael Jackson.
Who you said, by the way, did not abuse you.
Who Michael was innocent.
You've said you've had death threats.
Yes.
Because you have this information
yes.
and have threatened to expose it. Another reason, I think, to go to police. That's a crime, to threaten someone's life.
I've gone to the police with that as well.
And what would be wrong with going to the police now again? Didn't work out in Santa Barbara.
There's a statute of limitations, Matt, in the state of California, which protects people. It's not that way in New York. It's that way only where the movie industry is, conveniently enough, in California. That's the seriousness of this. You cannot, because if I were to go to the police, I would be the one who's getting sued.
Le gars, il dit qu'il est allé à la police pour dénoncer les abus qui se faisaient sur les enfants à Hollywood, mais il était trop concentré sur essayer de trouver quelque chose sur Michael Jackson. Que Michael Jackson, c'était pas un pédophile. Mais ceux qui sont au pouvoir, ils ont donné le mot d'ordre à la police. Trouve quelque chose sur Michael Jackson.
Uh-oh.
Elle attend la validation dans son oreillette. Et c'est là qu'elle se dit que tout ce cirque est allé trop loin. Peut-être qu'elle repense à la capsule Orion lâchée depuis cet avion qui tournait devant San Diego à 20 000 pieds. Ou peut-être qu'elle en rit parce qu'il n'y avait pas de vapeur d'eau. Il nous parlait de plus de 5000 degrés pendant la rentrée dans l'atmosphère.
5,000 degrés Fahrenheit.
Et pourtant seulement 1000 degrés dans l'eau, ça donne ça. Peut-être qu'elle a vu qu'ils avaient oublié le logo NASA sur le module. Ou alors elle repense à Reed Wiseman, qui nous disait que c'était la première fois qu'on envoyait des hommes sur la Lune.
This is the first time we're going to send humans to the moon.
Uh-oh.
Ils sont tombés à 40 000 km/h,
24,000 miles per hour.
avec un ralentissement 4G. Et Wiseman répond comme s'il était dans son salon.
Houston, Integrity, we have you loud and clear.
Regardez cet exemple à 3,6G. Donc là, aucun souci. Et pas besoin de protection pour ouvrir le side hatch. À la place, ils nous font un signe satanique de la main et sont prêts pour une nouvelle interview. Parce que c'est ça leur vrai métier. Comme l'a dit Sean Duffy, ils viennent de Central Casting.
American astronauts that are on that flight, they're right out of Central Casting.
Une agence spécialisée dans le casting de figurants. Parce que les astronautes sont des acteurs. Alors soit ils sont très bien payés, soit ils sont menacés. Mais dans tous les cas, ils se moquent de vous.
La capsule est arrivée, elle était supposée d'être à 5000 degrés, puis 2 minutes après, il ouvre la porte comme si ça avait pas été chaud pantoute.
And have you seen any other vaccine that was put out for the public that skipped the animal test?
Never before, especially for children.
And as what I've read, they actually started the animal test, and because the animals were dying, they stopped the test. Folks, I think that's important to understand there that what we're talking about is the American people are now the guinea pigs. This is the test program that's going on. They didn't do the human testing, and they stopped the animal test because the animals were dying. And then they turned it out for the public. And we are now looking at businesses that want to mandate that this experimental vaccine be given to people as a condition of their employment. And yet we have this death count that continues to rise and be totally...
Il y en a plein qui se sont fait vacciner quand même. J'ai dit d'habitude, c'est environ 10 ans de tests pour des vaccins. Ils vont tester ça sur des animaux. Après, ils vont faire des petits tests sur les humains. Là, ils ont testé ça. Ça a été, nous autres, directement, les cobayes. Un vaccin shooté en 6 mois, sans aucun test. Puis même le monde très intelligent dans ma famille, qui ont été des professeurs, toutes sortes d'affaires, qui réussissent bien. Tu leur dis, hey, c'est 10 ans de test minimum, puis ils riaient de moi, puis ils disaient, non, t'es un fou. On peut se fier à la science, on peut se fier à la science. Mais regarde, ce monde-là, aujourd'hui, ils sont malades. Comme qu'il y en a qui ont compris aussi, hein. Il y en a que je leur ai parlé, puis qui ont compris, puis il y en a qui n'ont rien voulu comprendre.
Je m'excuse, je vais vous choquer.
Oui, le Club de Rome. Et donc
Tesla.
Oui,
Tesla,
oui, le Serbe.
A inventé une voiture qui a fait 600 km avec un moteur quantique. On a fait brûler son laboratoire 2 fois et on l'a fait exploser 1 fois, pour être sûr que ce moteur quantique... Bon. Il y a des ingénieurs qui ont fait tourner ce moteur quantique, ils sont tous morts dans un accident d'avion, de voiture, ou bien une intoxication alimentaire.
Oh là, t'es complotiste en plus.
Il y a un gouvernement qui l'année passée, le gouvernement indien a dit, moi j'ai pas de charbon, j'ai pas de pétrole. Donc il a demandé à M. Tewari, qui est une toute grande famille d'ingénieurs de l'Inde, de développer le moteur quantique. L'ambassade d'Amérique et plusieurs ambassades occidentales et d'Arabie Saoudite l'ont dit, you should not do that.
Pour ta propre sécurité.
Et donc, il a décidé de mettre l'armée autour du laboratoire. Et continue.
Encore en ce moment?
Oui. Il suffit d'aller voir, on voit la photo du moteur quantique. Bon. Nous sommes dans une phase expérimentale. On est en train de rattraper ce que Tesla a dit il y a 100 ans. Ça fait 100 ans. Hein. Mais, si ce moteur quantique, donc ça consomme 50 watts et ça produit 10 000 watts indéfiniment. Donc tu crées une centrale, au lieu de nucléaire, une centrale quantique, qui, le coût de l'énergie, c'est 0. Bon, ça fonctionne avec le champ de Planck. Je vous passe les détails. Mais, ce qui est en train de se passer, c'est que ça fout en l'air le programme politique des Russes, des Saoudiens, des Américains, de tout le monde. Parce que toutes les guerres sont autour de tubes de pétrole.
Ça fait longtemps qu'ils sont capables de faire de l'énergie gratis. Ça fait longtemps. Puis là, ils vont vous faire croire dans pas long qu'ils vont couper le breaker d'hydro ici au Québec. Puis dire, il n'y a plus assez d'électricité, on va être obligé de vous rationner. Ouais, le pétrole, il n'y en a plus assez, on va être obligé de vous rationner. Ou le réchauffement climatique. C'est toute la bullshit. Ça fait longtemps qu'ils savent.
8 glasses of water a day. You should drink 8 glasses of water a day, right? What if I told you the same year they started telling people to drink 8 glasses of water a day was the same year that they started putting fluoride in the water? Look right there. When did they start saying drink 8 glasses of water a day? 1945. And when did they decide that your teeth are very important to keep healthy? That's why they're putting fluoride in the water. That's the only reason. There's no other reason why. 1945. And then 40 or so years later, they changed the building code to have PVC pipes instead of copper pipes because copper removes some or just neutralizes some of the fluoride. And they wanted to make sure your teeth were fully healthy, so they couldn't have copper denaturing some of the fluoride compounds, of course. Now look, many of us have or have had in the past a calcified pineal gland because of this. And if you think that's BS, it is completely confirmed that fluoride absorbs into the pineal gland faster than any other tissue in the body.
Did you niggas know that houses stopped using copper when it literally purified water on its own?
Yep, because plastic is cheaper, faster, and builders love cutting costs, even if it feels like we downgraded the entire vibe of houses overnight.
Here's the thing. From the early 1900s through the 1960s, copper was the default in American homes because it lasted 50 to 100 years, resisted bacteria, and conducted electricity, making houses literally more grounded environments.
Copper was the healer. Plastic is the killer.
Copper wasn't decorative. When water flows through it, ionic exchange releases trace copper ions, which changes mineral structure in ways plastic pipes physically cannot replicate.
So my water used to be upgraded?
Yes. Studies on copper plumbing show antimicrobial effects through the oligodynamic effect, which damages bacterial cell walls without chemicals or added filters.
That's deeply ironic.
So, you might ask, but why does that matter to our bodies? Your nervous system runs on electrical signals. Copper is essential for enzymes like cytochrome C oxidase, which helps cells create energy, meaning trace copper supports bioelectric function.
So plastic pipes are low-key, spiritually bankrupt.
But have you considered that copper also shaped how homes interacted with invisible forces like electromagnetic fields, creating calmer internal environments?
Exactly. Dense copper networks act as partial Faraday cages, reflecting and absorbing EM radiation, which modern synthetic builds barely do at all. This wasn't just nostalgia. You can't rebuild the past, but you can use copper cookware, mineral-balanced water, and grounding practices to reclaim some lost benefits intentionally. We didn't just replace pipes with plastic. We replaced durability, biology, and natural protection, and most people never realized what quietly disappeared.
Pensez à vous abonner si vous aimez le contenu. Partagez ça à du monde qui ne veulent pas réveiller. Si tu veux aider la chaîne, dans les informations, il y a mon courriel. Tu peux m'envoyer des idées de vidéos. Tu peux m'envoyer des vidéos que je vais poster. Le programme pour aider le monde à se suicider.
It's been 2.5 years since my wife first fled Canada to save her life in the United States from stage 4 ovarian cancer after the Canadian healthcare system left her to die, where her only option would have been to kill herself on MAID because they had no treatment for her. They lied to her and said that the HIPEC surgery wouldn't ever save her life, but it did. They lost her chemo requisition, so she never got started on that. She didn't even meet her Canadian oncologist. It was always by a phone. Well, he was the guy that lost her chemo requisition too. And every time she went to the hospital begging for help in the ER because her lungs were filling in with fluid and she was drowning in them, they kicked her out and sent her home with opioids because they didn't have anybody there to drain her lungs. So now she's getting closer to death, and in a wheelchair, in a last-minute decision, she decides to try her luck in the United States. So now we're evacuating her from Vancouver Island on BC ferries to get her into a hospital in Seattle, where they immediately got her into the system, got her started on chemo, and gave her that life-saving HIPEC surgery. Well, during this time, I'm stuck in Canada because I'm not American and I can't just come here for no reason like that. I can't live here. So my wife decides to come back to Canada to be with her family. And during that time, she has another medical emergency and finds herself again in a Canadian hospital, rotting and dying and nearly about to go septic. So again, I have to unplug her from the machines and evacuate her by car and ferry back to the Seattle hospital, and she's sick as a dog, puking bile this whole time. They get her to the hospital, and guess what? She is about to go septic, and they give her immediate surgery and save her life. Again. But she comes back to Canada. And guess what? The cancer's coming back now. So again, she has to leave. Over and over, this pattern continued until finally we decided enough is enough, and we got me a green card. We had to get the help of a Congress lady who rushed the entire process, start to finish, and I got a green card in less than 3 months. That's probably the fastest anybody's ever gotten a green card.
Au Canada, tout ce qu'ils ont dit à cette fille-là, c'est « Oublie ça, tu vas mourir. On va te donner l'aide médicale à mourir, puis on va prélever tes organes. » Ils ont un gros trafic là-dessus. Je vous le dis. Ici, ils nous disent « Ah, le système de santé est gratuit. On a un des meilleurs systèmes de santé au monde. » C'est pas vrai. Quand t'es mieux de payer des centaines de milliers de dollars pour aller aux États-Unis, qu'au moins eux autres vont sauver ta vie, que de faire dire ici au Canada, on va te donner le programme d'aide médicale à mourir, t'as aucune chance de survivre, puis on va vendre tes organes.
What you're looking at right here is extremely high-end makeup. Some Sephora stuff that you guys are always putting on your face. Chemical sludge. This is how it's made. You guys have no idea what it's doing to your body. I want you to listen to this video right here.
One of the biggest cosmetic brands, designer cosmetic brands in the world. Their ex-formulator had contacted us. He said, quote unquote, the cosmetic industry is destroying women's cells. C-E-L-L-S, cells. And I said to him, why don't you say something? He said, I can't.
This cosmetics issue is even bigger than the tobacco industry because we're talking about thousands of different chemicals.
The same chemicals being dumped and running through the rivers that are toxic are running through our blood.
For some of these chemicals, millions of children will be harmed before we actually decide whether it's toxic or not.
Skincare, hair, feminine care products have been associated with reproductive problems. Ovarian cancer, preterm birth, mercury poisoning,
population control.
The cosmetics industry comes back with their own science, and they say, oh, just a little bit of a cancer-causing chemical.
You have no way of knowing what's in your product.
Votre déodorant que vous vous mettez en dessous des aisselles, ça vous rend du mercure et de l'aluminium dans le corps. Vos cosmétiques que les filles se mettent d'en face, c'est pas bon. Il n'y a pas grand-chose, en fait, de qu'est-ce qu'ils nous donnent qui est bon, je vais vous dire.
Research has people a little frightened to use it. There's a new study out that says after just one day, chemicals in sunscreens enter your bloodstream.
Before you grab that bottle of sunscreen, the first thing you need to do is check the ingredients on the back.
They are chemicals and they can potentially be dangerous.
Look at any bottle of sunscreen on the store shelf and it'll more than likely have one of these ingredients.
Avobenzone and oxybenzone are very commonly in your chemical sunscreens.
But a new study finds when you apply sunscreen with those chemicals, along with two other ones known as escamsol and octocrylene, they can absorb into your skin and into your bloodstream.
So I have a little box here, which you may recognize, even at a distance.
La pâte à dents, guys, la pâte à dents.
It's nothing more or less than the box that the toothpaste, Colgate toothpaste comes in. And it's fluoridated. Did you know that every toothpaste, no matter just Colgate, any toothpaste that has fluoride in it has the following warning printed on the box as well as on the tube. Did you know there was a warning on those tubes? A lot of people didn't. I'm glad that this group is a little better educated. And let me just quick read you. It's in tiny, tiny print, so I just printed it out for myself so I could read it easily. It says, warnings. Keep out of the reach of children under 6 years of age. Don't you want to teach your kids to brush their teeth? Keep out of you can't give them toothpaste.
Going down rabbit holes on this podcast. Bayer is a pharmaceutical company. Monsanto is a pesticide company. Bayer bought Monsanto. Bayer makes drugs for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Monsanto makes a toxic herbicide called glyphosate that they spray on food. Glyphosate, wait for it, causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, we've come full circle. Big Pharma is in bed with Big Food, and both of them are in bed with our Western health system. None of which is concerned with making cures, all of which is concerned with making customers.
Ils s'en foutent de votre santé. Ils veulent vous tuer, ils veulent vous rendre malade, puis ils veulent que vous achetiez des médicaments. Ils créent le problème, ils créent la solution.
You think expiration dates were created by scientists to keep you safe. You are wrong. They call this concept manufactured obsolescence, and it was actually invented by a mafia boss. In 1932, Al Capone realized milk had higher profit margins than illegal alcohol. But thousands of independent small dairy farmers controlled the entire Chicago milk delivery market then. Capone could not compete on quality, so he lobbied the city council for safety laws. He aggressively pushed a law requiring a visible, stamped expiration date on every single bottle. The public cheered, but Capone was the only distributor who owned expensive industrial stamping machines. Overnight, he made his rivals' unstamped bottles completely illegal to sell. Brilliant, ruthless, simple math. The printed date was never about freshness. It was a weapon to crush local competition. Today, massive food conglomerates run the exact same expiration cartel playbook on your weekly groceries. With the exception of baby formula, the federal government does not regulate those dates, ever. Manufacturers just make them up. It is a completely arbitrary peak quality suggestion for consumers. They print strict best buy dates on salt that has existed for millions of years. Why? To create a psychological fear of poisoning, so you throw away perfectly good food.
Consumers are unaware that the fruit they eat from the supermarket has been treated with a product called Smart Fresh. Now, before I get into what Smart Fresh is, I want you to see it in action. First, they place the fruit in a hermetically sealed chamber. Then they drop the Zyklon B, Smart Fresh, into some water to form a gas, and then they lock up the gas chamber nice and tight. They leave the fruit there for about 24 hours so that it can soak up all the gas, and voila, your fruit has been contaminated. Smart Fresh. Now, let's look at an apple that's been treated with Smart Fresh and compare it to an apple that hasn't been treated with Smart Fresh. This time-lapse video shows the changes over 3 months. As you can see, the Smart Fresh apple hasn't changed a bit. Most people don't even realize that the fruit they buy at the grocery store can literally be a year old before it's actually sold, and you wouldn't know the difference. Let's see what the makers of Smart Fresh have to say about their product. They say the active ingredient of Smart Fresh is methylcyclopropene, or MCP. They describe it as a simple hydrocarbon molecule. Well, that sounds perfectly innocent, doesn't it? A simple hydrocarbon. What could be wrong with that? Well, examples of simple hydrocarbons are as follows: butane, propane, and even hexane. It turns out they're gassing the fruit with petroleum-based products, ladies and gentlemen. Now, they just call it a simple hydrocarbon so that nobody worries about it. Who doesn't like a little diesel with their fruit, right? Their website also states that this can be used with other fruits and vegetables. Yum, yum, yum. Safe and effective for eradicating rodents and the population. If pesticides don't get you, Smart Fresh will, my friends. Smart Fresh is authorized for use with organic foods, because nothing screams organic like spraying hydrocarbons on your fruits and vegetables. And the worst part here is that people are totally unaware. Of course, the makers of Smart Fresh don't actually show you what Smart Fresh is on their website. They do, however, show you pictures of unsuspecting consumers smiling as they eat this nasty cocktail of pesticides and petrochemical additives. And it's all perfectly legal. Imagine eating GMOs that are sprayed with pesticides and then treated with Smart Fresh. What could go wrong there? Not only that, but the makers of Smart Fresh also make other exciting products that can be used before the harvest season.
This guy has no idea he's licked a chemical used to deliver chemotherapy.
Dairy Queen is fake. That's according to the FDA, whose own regulations say this cream is held together by pharmaceutical emulsifiers.
Dairy Queen is barely held together with 6 binders. It starts as artificial dairy, sweetened with liquid sugar and pumped with polysorbate 80, used in chemo wards. That base is dipped in counterfeit chocolate, just hydrogenated oil and stripped cocoa, topped with petroleum-based vanilla. Halo Top, Oreo, and Breyers, all scanned as non-legal ice cream in the...
Most people still think Subway is healthy fast food because if you look at their slogan, it says eat fresh. but once you learn what actually is inside them, you might never want to touch them again. If you look at their most important part of each sandwich and what every sandwich must have, it's bread. And if we take a look at how they're making it, you'll be shocked. In fact, Ireland's Supreme Court ruled that Subway's bread contains so much sugar that it can't legally be called bread anymore. It's 10% sugar, making it closer to cake than actual bread. Not only that, it has over 30 ingredients, including some really toxic chemicals like azodicarbonamide, which is used to make yoga mats and shoe soles, and potassium iodate, which has been linked to thyroid problems and kidney damage. Not to mention their grilled chicken, which is supposed to be just chicken with maybe just some seasoning, has 44 ingredients. So don't let this marketing fool you. The human body is not designed to handle that many chemicals daily, which is why all chronic diseases in the US are at their peak.
Chocolate company Lindt is facing a class action lawsuit. The suit alleges Lindt's dark chocolate bars contain significant amounts of lead and cadmium.
This heavy metal sponge is the most misleading bar on the planet. That 70% cocoa number is padded with residue and processing byproducts. Heavy metals that don't leave your body. Over time, they can accumulate in your kidneys and brain. I cross-checked 2 bars. One came back clean, no contaminations, but Lindt, 7 contaminations with a heavy metal risk.
Top-grown chocolate is coming to shelves in 2027. Oreo, Cadbury, and Toblerone are already funding the Israeli biotech producing it because a lab is cheaper than a farm.
Cadbury has been quietly replacing your chocolate every single year. This dairy milk isn't legal chocolate in 27 countries. The cocoa butter was replaced with vegetable fat, a cheap blend of 6 industrial oils. What remains is diluted with polyglycerol, then flavored with petroleum vanilla to mask the waxy taste. Soon, even that gets replaced. You'll be eating cells grown in a pharmaceutical tank. Exposure flagged lead and cadmium traces with an ultra-processing warning.
Look at the ingredient label of a Chick-fil-A sandwich, which I believe has over 50 ingredients, most of which is not what you would consider a food. So it's not just the food dyes, it's the emulsifiers, it's the conditioning agents, it's the preservatives. We've been running the largest uncontrolled science experiment on humanity for 50 years because none of these things are properly tested. Look at the ingredient label of a Chick-fil-A sandwich.
Je vais vous laisser avec un petit bijou à la fin. Je fais tout le temps ça pour ceux qui restent jusqu'à la fin. Aujourd'hui, le sujet, là, j'aurais pu le continuer. J'avais encore des dizaines de vidéos en banque. Fait qu'ils iront dans d'autres épisodes. Là. Donc, merci, guys, pour ceux qui ont été là jusqu'à la fin. Mets ton petit like en bas. Pense à t'abonner si t'aimes qu'est-ce que je fais. Partage ça. Puis, je vous laisse avec ça. Ciao, guys.
I can't tell you about the Matrix. All I can do is give you the red pill, and you got to see for yourself.